Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Ashrafil Anbiya wal Mursaleen, Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd, fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. The first hadith which we are going to look at is a hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, in Sunan Abu Dawood, Sunan al-Darmi, and in Sunan al-Nasai. And the theme of this particular hadith has already come before. The hadith narrated by Sayyidina Abu Hurairah anhu, he narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam Naha has prohibited an tunkahal mar'atu ala ammatiha, that a woman is married over her ammatiha, i.e. her paternal aunt, which we call in Urdu pupi, awil ammatu ala binti akhiha, or that a paternal aunt, i.e. a pupi, is married over her niece, i.e. her batiji, wal mar'atu ala khalatiha, and that a woman is married over her maternal aunt, or al khalatu ala binti ukhtiha, or that a maternal aunt is married over her banji, over her niece. Now, if you remember in last week's lesson, I mentioned the hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited that two women are married. So you can marry obviously up to 4 times, you can have up to 4 wives. But what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited from is basically to have one wife, and as a second wife you get married to the first wife's niece, or the first wife's batiji, or the first wife's banji, or the first wife's paternal aunt or maternal aunt. This is something which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited from. And the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited from such a nikah and such a marriage is because whenever there are two wives, there tends to be this kind of friction between them. In terms of one wife wants to impress the other. So, and what normally happens in that situation is that because one wife wants to impress the husband, one wife wants to gain the upper hand over the other wife when it comes to the husband's love and affection. Excuse me, in many cases it leads to some kind of friction between them. It leads to some degree of bad blood between them. It leads to some kind of petty fights and quarrels between them. And many of the time and many of the situation, it leads to cutting of the ties, breaking of the ties. And the cutting of the ties, the breaking of the ties is something which the Sharia has prohibited, something which is considered impermissible. The very famous hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, "La yadkhulul jannata qati'un," that a breaker of the ties would not enter Jannah, would not enter paradise. So when the breaker of the ties happens to be two relatives of each other, it's even more worse. It's worse, number one, when you are breaking ties with general Muslims, with Muslims in general, with friends. But it is even far worse and more sin if you are breaking ties with relatives. Because you'll get two sins. One is that you're breaking the ties, that in itself is wrong and bad. And also on top of that, you're getting the sin and the guna for breaking ties with relatives. Why? Because relatives are those who you should maintain ties with, who you should be, have connection with. So therefore, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as I said, the theme of this topic has already come before. I don't want to go into any detail here, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited that if, say, for example, you are already married to a paternal aunt, then to marry her niece, then that is something which is impermissible. Or you're married to a niece, then to marry that girl's paternal aunt, and that is something which is impermissible. And the same also applies when it comes to banjis and maternal aunts, banjis and khalas. This is something which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited. And then the hadith goes on to say, لا تنكح الصغرى على الكبرى ولا الكبرى على الصغرى. Now listen to the translation of this part of the hadith carefully, because literally the hadith means one thing, and the reality of the hadith or the actual explanation of the hadith is totally different to what the literal meaning and the literal definition of the hadith. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لا تنكح الصغرى على الكبرى ولا الكبرى على الصغرى, which, if you were to translate it word for word, it will mean that sughra, an immature girl, should not be married over a mature girl. Which basically means that if there is a mature girl or an older woman, then a younger girl or a younger woman should not be married or would not be allowed to have as a second wife. Wal kubra ala sughra will then mean that if a man is already married to a young girl, then it is not permissible for him, or it is prohibited for him, to marry or to have as a second wife someone older than her, ayya kubra. Now, as I was saying, that if we were to look at the literal meaning of this particular hadith, then this hadith is saying that, number one, if you are already married and the woman who you are married to, say, for example, is 30 years old, then the hadith is saying, La tunkahu sughra al-kubra, that if you want to then get married again, that second wife can't be younger than 30 years old, but instead she has to be either older or something like that. And the next part of the hadith says, Wal al-kubra ala sughra, that if you are already married to a young woman, just say you're married to a girl who's like 25 or even 30, Wal kubra ala sughra will then mean, oh, it's not permissible for you to marry a woman who's older than 25. Now, this is, and on the side, this actually tells us that you need to be an expert in hadith. You need to be someone who has studied hadith for many, many years before you are able to understand the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You are able to understand the total picture and in what context did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say these words. Because somebody who doesn't know any Arabic at all, who probably learned a few Arabic words here and there, sat in a few gatherings or in a few dars of hadith, if he now thinks himself to be the next mujtahid of the era or the next mujtahid of the century, he will easily get mixed up with hadiths or with sayings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like the one which is in front of us, because one has to bear in mind that not every single hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is taken on its face value. Not everything is meant literally. There are many, many ahadith where the metaphoric meaning is taken. Very similar to the Holy Quran. There are many verses in the Holy Quran where the literal meaning isn't taken, but metaphoric meaning is taken. Allah says, فَسَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Now, no one from the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah says, Nauzu billah, summa nauzu billah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a face, بِيَدِ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ, that Allah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a hand, no one takes the literal meaning there, but instead we take the metaphoric meaning. So here as well in this hadith we take the metaphoric meaning, and the meaning of this particular hadith here we say is that sughra in this context means a niece or a batiji or a banji, and kubra in this context means a maternal aunt or a paternal aunt, a pupi or a khala. And basically this last part of the hadith is a explanation of the hadith above, in terms of if someone is already married to a paternal aunt, he is not allowed to marry that paternal aunt's niece, or similarly if someone is already married to a maternal aunt, khala, he is not allowed to marry that maternal aunt's niece, i.e. banji, because of what we mentioned above in terms of the breaking of ties and the breaking of connection. So that concludes the first hadith. The second hadith which we are going to look at is a hadith which can be found in Sunan Tirmidhi, in Sunan Abu Dawood, in Sunan Nasa'i, and Sunan Darmi. And this hadith is narrated by Hajjaj bin Hajjaj al-Aslami, who narrates from his father that he once asked, Ya Rasulullah, O Prophet of Allah, Ma yuzhibu anni mazimmat al-radha, faqala ghurratun abdun aw amatun. Which means that he asked the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how can I fulfill the financial right, the financial haqq of the woman who breastfed my children, upon which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Ghurratun abdun aw ama, which means by giving her a gurra, and a gurra is by giving her a slave or a slave girl, amatun, or the value or the price of a slave or a slave girl, which in those days was approximately 500 dirhams. Now what we can gather from this particular hadith is that it is permissible for a woman to charge for the breastfeeding of the children she is doing. Some may think that this woman who is breastfeeding the children, she is selling her milk, and selling milk, some may argue, some may say that is not considered to be a commodity, it's not considered to be something which you can sell. Now milk is something which can be sold, and it is considered to be a commodity, and also on top of that, that woman is actually giving her time. It's an occupation. She is giving her time the same way a midwife is giving her time to help the woman in delivering the child. So similarly, this particular woman is breastfeeding the children. She is trying her best to do the tarbiyah of the children. So she is giving her time. So because of that, she is also obliged to receive some kind of financial benefit and some kind of financial assistance from the parents, from the father of the children who she is breastfeeding. Hence Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said to Hajjaj bin Hajjaj al-Aslami's father that give her a gurra, give her a slave or a slave girl, or the value of a slave or a slave girl to that particular woman for what she had done. Now from this particular hadith, I want to derive another ruling which can be found in the books of fiqh, and that is that it is, however, impermissible for a mother to take wages or to take money for breastfeeding her own children. A breastfeeding woman, a foster mother, she can actually say that, okay, I'll breastfeed the children, you need to give me this much amount of money. That's permissible. However, the mother of the children, the wife of the husband, she cannot turn around and say to the husband that I'll breastfeed the children, but you give me this much amount of money. That would not be allowed. And the reason why it would not be allowed is because it is the mother's moral duty. It's the mother's moral duty to breastfeed her children. And remember, something where a person is morally obliged to do, he or she cannot receive any financial benefit or any kind of monetary benefit for that. Keep that in mind. Anything which you are morally obliged to do, you can't receive money for that. Now, let me just explain what I mean by something which you are morally obliged to do and you can't receive any extra money for that, or you can't receive wages for that. And I'll give you an example of, say, a madrasa or an Islamic school where teachers are teaching. And let's take an example of the madrasa which we have here. The madrasa, it starts from 4:30 to 7:30. So it goes on for 3 hours. And the teachers who are teaching there, they're getting paid. And their main responsibility or their main duty is to teach the children, to make sure that they come on time. They teach the children Quran, they teach the children Qaida, they teach the children how to pray Salah, how to do wudu, istinja, these kind of things. That is, in a nutshell, their main duty and their main responsibility. Now, also at the same time, even though it may not have been communicated to them, but the teachers have a moral duty in terms of to make sure they may have some other kind of moral duty which, even though the principal or the head teacher didn't stipulate it to them, but they are morally obliged to do. And I'll give you an example. It's like, say, for example, during namaz time, during salah time, even though it's not written in the teacher's contract, even though it may not be communicated to the teacher that during salah time, make sure that the kids don't mess around, make sure that the kids are not allowed, make sure that the kids, they don't make too much noise. Even though it's not written there, even though the head teacher didn't stipulate that, even though the muhtami didn't stipulate that, but it's a moral duty of that teacher to make sure that the kids are quiet whilst the salah is going on, or before salah, or whilst the sunnah is being prayed. It's the teacher's moral duty. Now, the teacher now, in that situation, can't then say to the muhtamim or the principal that, okay, I'll look after the children, I'll supervise them, but you need to give me extra £10. That's not going to be allowed. Why? Because it's the teacher's moral duty to do that. So remember, whatever the moral duty is, you're not allowed to receive any kind of financial gains or financial benefit of that. Another example could be like the wife at home. So it's the wife's moral duty to cook the food, to clean the house, to clean the rooms and so on. And the wife can't say to the husband, okay, I'll cook the food, but you need to give me £20. That's not going to be allowed. So remember what the moral duty is of a person. They cannot receive any financial gains or benefit of that. And this is why we see that a mother of the child, because it's her financial, it's a moral duty to look after the child, to breastfeed the child. So therefore, if she cannot demand, she cannot say to the husband that I'll do it, but you need to give me this much amount of money. That would not be permissible for the wife to ask the husband in such a way. The third hadith which we're going to look at is a hadith narrated by Abu Tufail al-Ghanawi, and he narrates قال كنت جالسا مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, that we were once sitting with Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم, is أقبلت امرأة, when a woman came. So we were all together with Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم, we the companions, and a woman came. فبسط النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم رداءه حتى قعدت عليه. Now all of a sudden Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then spread his chadar, his blanket on the floor, hatta qa'adat alayhi, so that this woman could come and sit on the blanket. فَلَمَّا ذَهَبَتْ. Now when this woman went away, the Sahabas, they were asking amongst themselves that, who is this particular woman? It can't be, say, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mother, because she passed away many years before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's bi'zat and prophethood. So who is this woman who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has shown so much respect and love and affection, to the extent that he spread a chadar or a blanket on the floor, made her sat down there? So who is this particular woman? So qila, it was then said, هذه أرضعت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, that this woman was the foster mother who breastfed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, i.e. this woman was Hazrat Halima Sa'diya radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Now what we can gather from this particular hadith is number one, the same respect, the same love or affection, the same obedience, the same rights and hukuk our nasabi ma, our own mother has, the same love, the same affection, the same respect our foster mother has as well. Same way we have to obey our mother, we have to listen to them, we have to respect them, we have to love them, show affection to them, show respect to them. وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ, not to say uff to them, not to scold them. The same rules, the same etiquettes, the same adab, the same situations, the same conditions also apply to our foster mother as well. And this can be quite clearly seen from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's practical amal and action in this particular hadith, that when Hazrat Halima Sa'diya radiyallahu ta'ala anha came, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam put a nice blanket on the floor for her so that she can comfortably sit on that particular floor, so that her clothes doesn't get dirty on the Arabian sand. And then when she went away, the Sahabas, as I was explaining the hadith, they asked who this particular woman was, upon which everyone said that this woman was Hazrat Halima Sa'diya radhiyallahu anha. And I mentioned in last week's lesson that there were in total 4 women who breastfed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the 4 women were, number 1, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mother Hazrat Amina radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Thereafterwards it was Hazrat Halima Sa'diya radiyallahu anha. Thereafterwards, number 3 is Suwayba, who was the slave girl of Abu Lahab. And I mentioned in last week's lesson that because of this, that when Suwayba breastfed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Lahab, who was the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but as we probably all know, he was also at the same time later on in his life a staunch enemy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a staunch enemy of Islam. But when Suwayba breastfed his nephew Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Lahab was so happy that he freed Suwayba. And it's mentioned that because of this good deed and because of this good act of virtue, Abu Lahab, he will be in hell, because obviously he did not accept Iman, he did not accept or believe in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or in Allah or in Islam. So he will be in hell. But because of this good deed and because of this good virtue and action, the azab and the punishment will be to a certain extent decreased, and there will be takhfif in his azab and in his punishment the hereafter, similar to the story of Abu Talib, as mentioned in the hadith of Al-Bukhari, that because of his love and affection to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because of the way he looked after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in particular in the very beginning of Islam, when the pagans of Makkah, when the Quraysh were torturing Rasulullah, well, not Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam a lot, but the other companions, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was also persecuted in terms of people would throw stones and bricks and these kind of things at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So because Abu Talib helped Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, assisted Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, showed love and affection, what will happen is that because of that, he died on kufr as well, he died on shirk as well, but because of that, there is some degree of easiness and there is some degree of lightness of his punishment in the hereafter. And as mentioned in the hadith of Al-Bukhari, that the lightest punishment which Abu Talib will have is that he will be in the fire of hell, but he will be made to wear shoes or sandals made out of fire, which will cause his brain to boil. So that is the way Baza was saying. And number 4, the fourth person, the fourth woman to breastfeed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was Ayman, who was the slave girl of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's father, Abu Talib. The next hadith is a hadith which can be found in Musnad Ahmad, in Sunan Tirmizi, in Sunan Ibn Majah, narrated by Ibn Umar anhu, that there was once a person called Ghaylan bin Salama al-Thaqafi. Aslama, he converted to Islam. وَلَهُ عَشْرُ نِسْوَةٍ فِي الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. And the hadith goes on to say that Ghaylan, he had 10 wives fil jahiliyyah, who he married during the days of ignorance, meaning that before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's bi'sat, intervention, or another way to look at it, that during his time as a non-believer, as a non-follower of the religion of Allah and the religion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had 10 wives. And it was very common in those days for men, for Arabs in particular, to have many wives. In Islam allows only 4 wives, but in those days it's common for one man to have 10 wives, 20 wives, and so on. So this person, Ghaylan bin Salama, he had 10 wives. فَأَسْلَمْنَ مَعَهُ. And all of the 10 wives had also converted to Islam with him. Not only has he converted to Islam, his 10 wives have also converted to Islam as well. Then the hadith goes on to say, فَقَالَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم أَمْسِكْ أَرْبَعًا وَفَارِقْ سَائِرَهُنَّ. Now when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard about his predicament and his situation, that he's converted to Islam, his wives have also converted to Islam, but he's got 10 wives, whereas the Sharia only allows 4 wives. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him that keep 4, amsik arba'an wa farik sa'irahunna, and release the rest of them, or divorce or separate the rest of them. Now the other Imams of the view that in such a situation he has a choice of keeping whichever wife he wants. So somebody, say, has got 6 wives and he has converted to Islam, the wives have also converted to Islam as well. So the other Imams of the view that he could keep whichever, he's got a choice, taqir, of whichever wife he wants to keep. So if he wants to keep wife 1, 3, 5 and 6, and he wants to divorce wife 2 and 4, that's okay, that's totally permissible. However, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, and this is also the opinion of Ibrahim Nakhai rahmatullah alayh, they're of the view that the first 4 wives who he married, their nikah and their marriage would still be intact, and the other 2 wives would automatically be divorced and would automatically be separated. Just say, for example, somebody got married, somebody converted to Islam, and when he converted to Islam he had 6 wives. So what would happen is that the first 4 wives will still remain in his nikah, in his marriage, and the other 2 will automatically be divorced. However, other imams, and it's mentioned in the commentary of this hadith, which can be found in Mirqat of Mulla Liqai rahmatullahi, it's mentioned that Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi is of the view that Imam Muhammad, by the way, is the student of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi. He's of the view that such a person has a choice of whichever wife he wants to be with. So he's got a choice out of the 6 or 10 or 12, that out of the 12 or out of the 10, out of the 8, whichever 4 he wants in his nikah, he can do that, and the rest will be separated. Whereas, excuse me, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi, he is of the view that the first 4 wives will automatically remain in his nikah, in his marriage, and the others will automatically be separated and will automatically be divorced. And the next hadith thereafterwards is similar to what I've just mentioned now. This is narrated by Nawfal bin Muawiyah, that he narrates, قال أسلمت, that I became a Muslim, I converted to Islam, وتحتي خمس نسوة, and he said that I had 5 wives. So فسألت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, asked Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم what I should do, upon which Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم said, فارق واحدة وأمسك أربعا. As I explained before, Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم advised him that keep 4, because in Islam you're allowed to have 4 wives, so you can keep 4 wives. وَفَارِقْ وَاحِدَةً, or فَارِقْ وَاحِدَةً, but out of the 5 you need to divorce one of them, you need to separate one of them. So Nawfal bin Muawiyah radiallahu anhu then goes on to say, فَعَمِدْتُ إِلَىٰ أَقْدَامِهِنَّ صُحْبَ عِنْدِي آقِرٌ مُنْذُ 60 سَنَةً فَفَارَقْتُهَا, which means that out of the 5 wives, the wife who I was married to the longest, i.e. basically my first wife, who I was married for, as mentioned in the hadith, منذ 60 سنة, for 60 years. But because this wife happened to be a aqir, happened to be barren, meaning that she was unable to give birth to children, so I decided to separate her, I decided to divorce her, and the other 4 wives I kept. And the next hadith, very quickly, and this will also be the last hadith of this week's lesson, similar to the aforementioned 2 hadiths which I mentioned, this time narrated by Dhahak bin Fayroz ad-Daylami from his father, that قال قلت, I asked, Ya Rasulullah, O Prophet of Allah, inni aslamtu, I have converted to Islam, wa tahti ukhtan, and I have in my nikah, in my marriage, 2 sisters. As I mentioned before, وَأَن تَجْمَعُ بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ, that in Islam it's impermissible for a man to be married or to have 2 wives, and both the wives happen to be sisters of each other. That is impermissible. Again, this has been mentioned before in detail. So he narrates that I converted to Islam, I had 2 wives, but they both happen to be sisters. In other religions, it's considered to be permissible. In particular, in the Majusi religion, in the fire worshipping religion, is considered to be the norm to marry like your own sister even. So he's saying here that they happen to be sisters of each other, upon which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ikhtar ayyatahuma shi'ta," that choose one of them. That whichever sister you want to be with, then choose her. Her nikah with you will be intact, whereas the other sister's nikah would not be permissible. Again, this is the opinion of the other A'immahs, the other Imams like Imam Shafi, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad, that if somebody did convert to Islam and in his nikah he has 2 wives and they both happen to be sisters of each other, so Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmad of the view that that person can choose whichever sister he wants to be with, and the other will automatically be divorced, will automatically be separated. Whereas Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi says that if the nikah with both of them took place at the same time, meaning that the 2 sisters who this person married before he converted to Islam, their nikah took place at the same time, i.e. in one transaction, he got married to both the sisters, then Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah is of the view that in that situation he will have a choice, whichever sister he wants to be with, and the other will automatically be divorced and separated. Whereas Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah then goes on to say that if he married the two sisters one after the other, and before he converted to Islam, just say first he married this particular woman, just say her name is Zainab, and then 2 years later he then married Zainab's sister Fatima. Now because both the nikah was done one after the other, in that situation Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah says that that man who has now converted to Islam, he would not have the choice of choosing whichever sister he wants to be with, but like the aforementioned ruling which I told you, in that situation the first nikah, the first sister who he married, in our example Zainab, her nikah would be correct and valid, and the other sister, i.e. Fatima's nikah, will automatically break when he converted to Islam. And this hadith can be found in Sunan Tirmidhi, in Sunan Abu Dawood, and in Sunan Ibn Majah. So we leave it there for this week. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to act on what's been said, and the ability to act upon the blessed words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.